He made me kneel in front of strangers in broad daylight with my medals spilling onto the concrete like trash. All because I sat down to rest. I'm a veteran, not a threat. But that moment, that cruel command, it lit a fire. They tried to break me. Instead, they woke a city. And what started with one folding chair turned into a movement no one saw coming. He shoved me, not with his hands but with his voice, cold, loud, sharp enough to pierce my bones. Down on your knees, old man, now, and just like that. I was back in Kandahar surrounded by dust shrapnel and the ringing echoes of war. Except this wasn't a battlefield. It was the front entrance of a luxury shopping plaza in downtown St. Louis. The man barking orders wasn't an enemy combatant. He was a mall security guard, a kid, really maybe mid-20s, head-shaved, chest-puffed sunglasses like he thought he was a SWAT officer, instead of someone paid barely over minimum wage to stand next to escalators. But behind him stood the real menace, Mr. Dalton, the property manager, slick black suit, clipboard in hand like a weapon, a smirk that cut deeper than any bayonet. He watched arms folded with the arrogance of someone who'd never missed a steak dinner. And why? Because I asked to rest for 5 minutes on a public bench, one I'd sat on for years ever since my VA appointments moved to the clinic next door. My knees don't work like they used to. Titanium on the left, nerve damage on the right. But none of that mattered. To them, I was just a nuisance in a worn-out jacket with an American flag patch. They didn't see the bronze star stitched inside. They didn't care about the limp, the service, or the years I gave to this country. All they saw was an old black veteran sitting where they didn't want him to be. "I'm not moving," I said, calmly gripping the handle of my cane. "This is a public space." "You're loitering," the guard snapped, and resisting. Before I could respond, he pulled out his phone and started filming me like I was some viral trophy. And that's when Dalton said it under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Make him kneel." And I did, not out of fear. Not because I wanted to, but because my knee gave out. The pain exploded like firecrackers up my spine. I crumpled onto the pavement, palms scraping the concrete, my medals, my goddamn medals scattering from the inside pocket of my jacket and clinking against the sidewalk like discarded coins. They laughed. Someone filmed. And across the street a teenage girl shouted, "Hey, you can't do that." But no one helped. I lay there, blood on my hand, shame burning hotter than the summer heat. And in that moment, I wasn't Staff Sergeant Raymond Curtis. I wasn't a father, a patriot, or a human being. I was a problem they wanted gone. I'm Raymond Curtis, retired U.S. Army 2nd Battalion. I served 3 tours overseas and came back with a chest full of scars and a heart full of hope. I never wanted to be a hero. Just a man who did his job, raised his kids, and held on to his dignity. I live alone now. My wife passed 3 winters ago cancer. My son's in Chicago. Calls when he can. I get by on a pension, small VA benefits, and side work fixing up antique radios. I don't drink, I don't fight, I mind my own business. But that day at the plaza, that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was targeted. Because 2 weeks earlier, I filed a formal complaint with the city after Dalton posted signs removing all unauthorized seating on the plaza signs aimed at the homeless, the elderly, the tired, and, yes, people like me. And now I was the example. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it. The moment my knee gave out. The sound of metals hitting concrete. The laughter I opened my closet and pulled out the shadow box, my commendations neatly framed glass still cracked from the move last year. I took out my bronze star, ran a finger over the engraving, and I wept, not for the pain, not for the humiliation, but for the silence, the way no one said anything, the way the people just walked past. I thought of my platoon, of men who died younger than the kid who pushed me. I thought of the promises we made to defend, to protect, to never leave a man behind. And yet here I was, left behind, again. I went back the next day. Same bench, same plaza, different me. This time I brought a chair, a folding stool I'd carried through deserts and jungles, unbreakable aluminum frame. I planted it dead center of the plaza, sat down, and held a sign on my lap. Veteran, forced to kneel here yesterday. Ask me why. People stared, some whispered, and then a voice. I saw the video. A young woman stepped forward. Maybe 1920 at most. Pink hoodie camera hanging from her neck. I posted it. It's got 4 million views. She handed me a printout, screenshots, comments, retweets. Headlines. Veteran forced to kneel by mall cop. Outrage in St. Louis investigation demanded. I started a petition, she said. Nearly 50,000 signed in 12 hours. You're trending. I looked at her stunned. I just wanted to sit down, I whispered. She smiled. And now the whole country's standing up for you. I didn't expect it to blow up. I thought maybe a few sympathetic comments, a handful of outraged veterans, a Facebook share or two. But this, the plaza, was no longer just concrete and fountain mist. It had become a battlefield. Not one of bullets and bombs, but one of memory, dignity, and reckoning. By morning, a small crowd had gathered. At first, it was quiet, respectful, strangers nodding. One man in uniform saluted me. A grandmother brought folding chairs for the elderly. Someone else brought coffee. People took turns sitting beside me sharing their stories. A Latina nurse who said her immigrant father had been mistreated by the same security guard. A black teenager who said he'd been followed in the mall every time he wore a hoodie. By noon, news vans had arrived, microphones in my face, flashbulbs snapping. A CNN reporter asked, "What do you want to say to the guard who forced you down?" I paused, looked around, took a breath. "I forgive him," I said, voice steady. "But I won't forget what he did." And then I added, "This isn't just about me. It's about all the quiet ways people get pushed down." This time, I just didn't stay down. The clip went viral. By 4 p.m., it had hit national news. Late-night hosts started cracking jokes. Politicians posted statements of solidarity. But none of it compared to the moment I saw my son, Marcus Curtis, step out of a taxi on the curb. "Dad," he said, rushing toward me, hugging me so hard it made my ribs ache. "Why didn't you call me?" I held him for a long time. My boy, 6'2", a corporate lawyer in Chicago, too busy to visit, but never too far to care. "You raised hell, Pop," he said, laughing through glassy eyes. "They're calling it the chair protest." I chuckled. "It's a good chair." "Yeah," he said, "but it's a better man sitting in it." That night we went home together. My old one-bedroom duplex never looked so small. But Marcus made coffee, sat across from me, and pulled out his laptop. "I've been doing research," he said. "Dalton, the property manager, has a history. 3 complaints for discrimination. 2 settlements out of court." "Figures," I muttered. "He owns 5 plazas around Missouri." And guess who sits on the board of the Private Security Association? I looked up. Dalton. Bingo. My stomach turned. So he's not just a jerk in a suit. He writes the rules. Marcus nodded. But now people are watching. That video lit a fire. He turned his screen. I saw a map filled with pins. Plazas across the country, people are organizing sit-ins for dignity. Veterans, seniors, single moms. They're all bringing chairs. Something inside me cracked something old and heavy. And from that crack came light. The next morning I woke early, put on my best blazer, polished my shoes, picked up my medals not to hide in a pocket this time, but to wear. Marcus drove me downtown. When we arrived, the plaza had transformed. More than 100 people sat in folding chairs. Children chalked messages of hope across the sidewalk. Respect our elders. Veterans deserve better. This is public space. A gospel choir sang softly under the statue of a Civil War general. A group of veterans saluted when I approached. A woman pressed a folded flag into my hands. "From my father," she whispered. "He passed last year, but he would have wanted you to have it." I couldn't speak, just nodded. But not everyone was smiling. Across the street, Dalton watched. Arms folded, sunglasses on, jaw tight, and beside him the same security guard from before. He looked pale now, like someone who realized they lit a match in a fireworks store. Police stood nearby more than usual. The city had been forced to respond. The mayor issued a public apology. The shopping complex's board had scheduled a meeting. An official inquiry into security conduct had been announced, and that's when something wild happened. The security guard walked toward me, alone. He stopped a few feet away, took off his sunglasses, and said in a voice full of something like shame, "Sir, I was wrong." A hush swept the crowd. He looked me dead in the eye. I followed orders I shouldn't have. I saw a uniform and didn't see the man. "I'm sorry." I studied him. He was shaking. I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." He swallowed hard. "They told me if I apologized publicly, I'd be fired. But I couldn't live with it." The crowd gasped. I stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You just reclaimed your humanity," I said. He broke into tears. By nightfall, the chair was no longer mine. It belonged to a movement. They carried it, yes, physically, carried it to City Hall and placed it in front of the building. Someone attached a brass plaque that read, "Forced to kneel here, he stood for us all. Dalton." He vanished from the plaza. Rumor had it he was suspended. A deeper investigation was coming, but I didn't need revenge. I needed healing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it. In the voices around me, in the stories people told, in the simple defiant act of sitting down. I had testified before, in uniform, in foreign lands, in matters of life and death. But this time, it was different. This time, I stood not for a country, but for dignity. For every man or woman ever forced to shrink in public while others watched and did nothing. For every tired soul who had only wanted to sit to breathe to exist, and was told that was too much. The city hearing was held inside a modern glass building, but to me it felt like a courtroom. Tall ceilings, rows of chairs, cameras lining the back wall like watchful vultures. Microphones set on long desks. Across the room sat Dalton, still in his suit, but something had changed in him. The cocky tilt of his head was gone. The smirk had evaporated. He looked defensive, like someone who realized too late that power built on cruelty is never stable. He didn't look at me, not once. The city councilwoman, a short woman with gray curls and fire in her voice, opened the hearing. "We are here today not to pass blame, but to pursue truth," she said. But make no mistake, what we saw was not just an incident. It was a symbol of what happens when systems forget who they are meant to serve. I was called first. They gave me 5 minutes. I took 7. I served in the United States Army for 23 years. I began. I fought in 2 wars. I've been shot at, bombed, and left for dead. My body is metal in places where bone used to be. I have scars, physical, emotional, invisible. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the medals. One by one, I placed them on the table. I didn't come here to ask for special treatment. I came here because I sat on a bench for 5 minutes. And for that, I was forced to kneel. I let that sit. You may think this is about a chair, or a guard, or one bad day. But it's not. It's about how we treat the people we find inconvenient. The room was silent. Even the air seemed to pause. I was humiliated. On camera. In front of strangers. Because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged. I looked directly at Dalton, and you know what hurts more than the fall. The fact that no one in your position thought it was wrong. Dalton flinched. But here's the thing about being pushed down once you're on your knees. You have a choice: stay down or rise. And I rose. I sat back. Done. Then came the testimonials. A teenage girl who had filmed the incident told how she had grown up watching her grandfather, also a veteran, be treated with reverence only to see me treated like trash. An elderly white woman spoke of being asked to leave the same plaza for sitting too long after chemo treatments. A local pastor said he'd been removed from the mall last Christmas for singing carols too loudly. One by one, stories poured in. From different people, different races, different lives, but all the same theme. Power used to humiliate. Space used to exclude. Dalton's turn came. He stood stiffly. His voice lacked the command he once wielded. I regret what happened, he said. But I followed policy. Loitering is loitering. A murmur spread. He continued. We didn't target Mr. Curtis. We treat all unauthorized presence equally. Someone in the back laughed bitterly. The councilwoman leaned forward. Are you aware of the definition of public accommodation under Missouri law? Dalton paused. I believe so. She didn't blink. Then you'll understand when I say that what happened wasn't just distasteful, it may have been illegal. Gasps. Dalton tried to speak again, but was interrupted by another council member. Sir, do you know how many veterans frequent your plazas? He stammered. No, came the sheepish answer. Maybe you should. Because they built this country, and they deserve more than asphalt and contempt. The room broke into applause. Not loud, not theatrical. Just steady, meaningful. I didn't smile. Not yet. I had learned the hard way. Change doesn't come from one hearing. It comes from what happens next. Afterward, in the hallway, a young man approached me. He had a crew cut, broad shoulders, looked fresh out of the military. Sergeant Curtis, he asked. I nodded. He snapped into a crisp salute. Sir, I wanted to say thank you for standing your ground, for not backing down. My little sister saw the video. She told her whole class about you. He dropped his hand. She said you reminded her that grown-ups still fight for what's right. I swallowed hard. Thank you, son, I said. What's your name? Corporal James Valdez. Just back from overseas. I shook his hand. Firm, proud. That handshake. It meant more than any plaque, any tweet, any apology. It meant I wasn't alone. Not anymore. That evening, the mayor held a press conference. She stood on the very plaza where it all began. I watched from the crowd as she adjusted the mic and looked around. I've ordered a full review of all private-public property agreements within the city, she announced. Effective immediately, the management of this plaza will be reassigned pending investigation. Applause. Dalton wasn't there, but the guard, the young man who once made me kneel, was. He stood near the fountain in plain clothes, quiet, respectful. Our eyes met. He nodded. I nodded back. And in that simple exchange, I saw something I hadn't expected. Growth. Maybe even redemption. Back at home, Marcus sat on the porch with me. The sky was pink. The cicadas buzzed like they always had. My chair creaked beneath me, my favorite sound. "You okay, Pop?" he asked. I stared ahead, then smiled. For the first time in a long while, I said, "Yeah, I am." They tried to remove it. 2 days after the hearing, a maintenance truck pulled into the plaza at dawn. No press, no announcements, just a quiet attempt to erase a symbol. The folding chair. My chair. The same one I had planted in the heart of downtown beside the fountain where I had been forced to kneel. The same chair people had painted with flowers flags and the words, "Respect is a right." But when the workers approached with their tools, they found something unexpected. People, dozens of them. Elderly veterans in windbreakers. College students holding coffee cups. Mothers with strollers. Construction workers still in their vests. They had gathered silently at sunrise, standing in a circle around the chair. One woman stepped forward, a teacher I'd later learn. She looked the worker in the eye and simply said, "Not today." I wasn't there when it happened. I had no idea a movement had grown that much that fast. But my phone buzzed before breakfast. A video. A live stream. Comments pouring in. They tried to take it. The people stood guard. "Raymond's chair stays." I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Not out of mockery, not revenge. Out of awe. Out of something deep and ancient. A joy carved from pain like sunlight, pouring through bullet holes. Later that day, Marcus and I returned to the plaza. We expected a small crowd. Instead, we found hundreds. And in the center of it all, the chair, still there, surrounded by chalk art, paper flowers, miniature flags. A little boy had left a plastic army figurine at its base. Reporters jostled for space. Drones buzzed overhead. A brass band played softly off to the side. It felt less like a protest and more like a living monument. But not to war, to peace, to dignity, to defiance. They asked me to speak. I didn't plan to. I hadn't written anything, but I stood anyway. And the moment I opened my mouth, the crowd fell into stillness. "My name is Raymond Curtis," I said, "and I was forced to my knees right here on this very stone." I paused. They tried to take my chair this morning, but what they didn't understand is that this chair isn't made of metal. It's made of memory. Applause. I raised my voice. They thought removing a seat would erase what happened. But this isn't just a seat. It's a stand. A stand against being silenced, against being overlooked, against being told to shrink. Cheers now. People chanting my name. I raised my hand. "And if they try again," I said, smiling, "I've got more chairs." That night something changed in the city. Local businesses began putting out extra benches. Handwritten signs appeared on doors. Veterans, welcome. Elderly, welcome. Everyone, welcome. Even the mayor issued a citywide directive to audit public seating accessibility. But more than policy, there was something else rising in the streets. Courage. People were starting to see the cracks in how power operated, in how silence enabled cruelty. And they were no longer afraid to speak. But not everyone celebrated. Dalton wasn't gone. Suspended, yes, but not without connections. He still had allies in the business council lawyers on speed dial, private networks of influence. Whispers began to swirl. He's filing a defamation suit. He wants to take the chair as evidence. He's going after the girl who filmed it. My blood ran cold, because I knew what this meant. He wasn't just trying to erase the chair. He was trying to break the people around it. I called Marcus. We sat at my kitchen table, documents spread across the surface. He shook his head. Defamation's a scare tactic. They're banking on people backing down. They don't know us very well, I said. He smiled. No, they don't. But I wasn't just thinking of myself. I was thinking of Lily, the girl who had filmed the original video. The one whose shaky footage had lit the match that burned through the country. She was barely 20 still, in college, working part-time at a bookstore. She didn't ask for this. She had only done what was right. And now she was a target. So I made a call. To a friend from the Legion. Then another. And another. And by morning, over 50 veterans stood outside Lily's apartment. Not to protest. Not to make a scene. To protect her. To say you're not alone. She opened her window, stunned. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You already said it, I called up. You said the truth. We're just here to make sure no one punishes you for that. The next day, Dalton blinked. He withdrew the threat. Too much heat, too many eyes, too many people watching. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because the Plaza Board had just scheduled a public vote to remove the chair permanently, citing public safety concerns. The hearing was set for Monday. As I lay in bed that night, I looked at my medals one more time. But this time, I didn't feel alone in the fight. I had a city behind me, a generation rising, and a chair that refused to move. Monday morning arrived with a weight I could feel in my bones. Rain fell heavy on St. Louis, slicking the streets in gray silence. But still, the people came. Umbrellas bloomed like protest flags. Elderly veterans in wheelchairs. Mothers holding toddlers. Students in ponchos, their signs wrapped in plastic sleeves. Don't erase the chair. If he kneeled, we stand. His knees, our backs, our city. I arrived at the hearing early, wearing the same blazer I had worn the day I was forced to kneel. Marcus walked beside me. Neither of us spoke much. The silence wasn't fear, it was readiness. We both knew this was a moment that could tip either way. Inside City Hall, the air was thick with tension. The Plaza Board, a polished panel of 5 men and 2 women, sat behind an oak desk, their faces unreadable. Dalton, somehow still smug, despite his disgrace, sat beside his lawyer. His suit pressed to perfection, his eyes burning holes through me. The vote was simple: allow the chair to remain permanently or remove it and dissolve the Plaza Memorial. But nothing about this was simple, because the chair wasn't just wood and metal anymore. It had become a question. Who do we choose to remember, and who do we try to forget? The public testimonies began. A mother stepped forward, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo of her son, a Marine who had died overseas. He died at 23, she whispered. He never got a bench. But Raymond did. And for a moment my boy lived again through his story. A young black teen followed. He wore a hoodie with the words, "I am worthy," across the chest. I watched Mr. Curtis get humiliated because he looked like me. And now I come here every week just to sit where he sat. That chair told me I belonged. Then came Lily. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice didn't shake. I filmed it because I knew what I was seeing was wrong. I never thought anyone would care. But now, people from all over the country have written to me. The chair means hope. It means we see you. Applause followed. Warm, raw, uncontainable. Then they called me. I walked slowly to the podium cane, in hand medals gleaming faintly under the artificial lights. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need to, Because pain doesn't need poetry. It needs truth. Most people don't remember the moment they lost their dignity, I said quietly. I do. I paused, eyes sweeping the room. They made me kneel not because I was dangerous, not because I was loud, but because I was sitting where someone like me wasn't supposed to be. A hush fell over the chamber. But what happened next wasn't defeat. It was revelation. That chair showed me the world is watching, and it showed others that standing up can start with sitting down. I looked directly at the board, and if you vote to remove that chair, you're not just moving furniture. You're erasing a story, a wound, a lesson, and you're telling everyone who ever felt small, go be invisible again. I stepped back. Done. The board recessed. People buzzed. Press waited outside like sharks' cameras cocked. I sat in the corner beside Marcus, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the weight of it all. And then, after an hour that felt like a century, the board returned. The chairwoman, a stern figure with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared her throat. The vote is as follows, she said. She read off names, one by one. No, no. Yes, yes. No, yes. 3-3. Everything hung on the last name, Mr. Cranston, the oldest board member. Vietnam vet. A man who hadn't said a word all day. He stood, straightened his tie, looked across the room, then spoke. I was a 17-year-old kid in the jungle when I watched my best friend bleed out in the mud, he said. When I came home, nobody said thank you. Nobody offered a seat, just silence. He took a long breath. Today, I break that silence. And then, simply, my vote is yes. The chamber exploded. People shouted, cried, hugged strangers. Reporters ran out waving headlines in the air. Someone started singing America the Beautiful, and 100 voices joined in. I sat there stunned, not from shock, but relief. The chair would stay. The story would live. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky broke into gold sunlight, spilling onto the plaza like redemption itself. People gathered once more. Around the chair, around each other. I looked at Marcus. He had tears in his eyes. You did it, Pop. No, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. We did it. But as I turned to look at the chair, something new caught my eye. A second chair, placed beside mine. Wooden, small, with a simple plaque. For those who never got to sit. I didn't know who had placed it, but I understood what it meant. Because justice isn't just for the ones who speak. It's for those who never had the chance. The vote had been won. The chair stayed. The people celebrated. But in the quiet after the cheers, I knew something lingered, something unfinished. Dalton. He wasn't at the vote's conclusion. Slipped out before the cameras turned. No apology. No reckoning. Just silence. That kind of silence isn't peace, it's plotting. 2 days later it came. A press release. Slick. Legal. Ruthless. Dalton was suing the city for defamation and unlawful targeting of a private citizen's reputation. He accused the council, the mayor, even me, of orchestrating a mob-style shaming campaign. My name was in the filing. So was Lily's. And suddenly the story wasn't just about a chair. It was about intimidation power and the machinery people like Dalton used when cornered. Marcus read the complaint with lawyer eyes. His jaw tightened. This isn't just a threat, he said. It's war. I looked down at my old hands. Wrinkled. Calloused. Still shaking from holding too much for too long. I didn't want this, I murmured. No, Marcus replied. But maybe you were meant for it. The city stood by me, publicly at least. The mayor held a press conference reaffirming their support for the chair and the movement. But behind closed doors, pressure mounted. Wealthy plaza investors whispered into phones. Lawyers dropped hints of financial consequences. News anchors questioned whether this had all gone too far. Dalton's lawsuit was doing its job. He didn't care about winning in court. He wanted to win in public opinion, to make the people tired, confused, divided. And it started working. Online forums flared with accusations. He's milking it. It's just a bench. Bet he staged it. Even some of the veterans' groups grew quiet. Sponsors backed out of the sit-ins. The crowd around the chair grew smaller, and Lily, she received threats, real ones, emails, phone calls. One morning, someone spray-painted "liar" on her apartment door. I visited her that day. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. She looked at me. "They're trying to erase me, Mr. Curtis." "They can't," I said. But inside, I wasn't so sure. Marcus gathered a small legal team, mostly pro bono lawyers, veterans turned attorneys, and even one civil rights professor from Columbia who offered help after watching the footage. They built a counter-case defamation defense, First Amendment protections, anti-SLAPP statutes. Still, the fear was real. Dalton had money, influence, and in this country, sometimes that's all you need. Until the leak happened. A reporter I hadn't met before young, wiry, sharp-eyed called me from an unlisted number. "I've got something," he said. "But you need to see it in person." We met in a parking lot behind a coffee shop. He wore a hoodie and kept glancing over his shoulder. He handed me a flash drive. "There's security footage Dalton tried to bury," he said. "From the day you were assaulted." I frowned. "I've seen the phone footage." "Not like this," he replied. "Watch it." That night, Marcus pulled up the file on my laptop. The footage was high quality, silent, from the plaza's security cams. A different angle. It showed Dalton, not just standing by, not just observing, but giving the order, clear as day. He leaned in to the guard, pointed at me, and mouthed something. "Make him kneel." I stared at the screen, not with anger, with disbelief, because I hadn't imagined it. And now I had proof. We took it to the council. We released it online. We handed it to the mayor's office, the press, and even Dalton's own board members. And suddenly, the tide turned. Fast. The footage went viral. Again. But this time, the tone changed. It wasn't just a movement. It was an exposé. Dalton became national news. Not the firm-faced businessman, but the architect of humiliation. Talk shows flamed him. Veteran groups called for boycotts. Even corporate sponsors who once defended him issued statements of condemnation. By Friday, the Plaza Association suspended him indefinitely. By Monday, they fired him. But it didn't stop there. More stories came out. Former employees who'd been silenced. Minority shop owners who were pushed out. Disabled vendors who were told to take their carts elsewhere. Dalton wasn't just a man who made one bad call. He was a pattern, and now that pattern was unraveling in public. The lawsuit dropped. No fanfare. Just a 2-sentence statement from Dalton's legal team citing newly surfaced evidence. Lily received an apology from the city and a scholarship fund in her name for students in media justice. Me, I was asked to speak at a national summit on civic dignity, but I declined because I didn't want to be a face on a poster. I just wanted to sit in my chair and not be forced to kneel. That Sunday, I returned to the plaza. It was quiet, peaceful, and in that stillness I saw something that made my breath catch. A third chair, this one smaller, painted yellow, with a note tied to the back. For our children, so they always have a place. I sat. I looked at the chairs beside me, and I realized this wasn't about rage. It wasn't even about victory. It was about memory. and what happens when we refuse to let it be erased. They tried to make me disappear, not just from a bench, but from history, from relevance, from public sight. But something unexpected happened instead. I became a symbol, not the kind etched in stone or carved into textbooks, but one that lived on folding chairs, protest signs, chalked sidewalks, and trembling voices that had found their strength. A year had passed since the day I was forced to kneel. 12 months, 52 weeks, thousands of minutes that rewrote a city's understanding of what it meant to belong. The plaza, it had changed. The space that once hummed with exclusion now breathed with welcome. The original chair, my chair, remained. Not behind glass or in a museum, but right where it first stood, polished by time and guarded by memory. Next to it sat the yellow child's chair, and on its other side, a new bench had been installed, custom steel engraved with names submitted by the community, in honor of those who sat when told to leave, in honor of those who stood when told to bow. The day of the dedication came under a bright spring sky. Crowds gathered bigger than I ever imagined. Old faces, new ones, children wearing shirts that read, "Respect is not optional." Veterans lined the path to the plaza, saluting as families passed. Lily stood at the podium, now a junior in journalism school, her voice clear and sure, as she recounted the story that changed everything. Then the mayor took the stage. She didn't read from notes. She didn't give a political speech. She looked directly at me. "Staff Sergeant Curtis," she said, "your quiet act of resistance forced us to listen. It reminded this city and this country that age does not erase dignity, that patriotism is not loudness but presence, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is sit down." They unveiled a plaque beside the chair. I hadn't seen the inscription before. Marcus had arranged it secretly. It read, "He was forced to kneel, but stood taller than any of them." I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't want to. Marcus stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. "You did this, Pop." I looked at him then, at the hundreds gathered. The news crews, the school kids, the parents, the veterans, the city. "No," I said softly. "We did." Later that evening, long after the cameras had gone and the crowd had thinned, I returned alone. The sun was sinking behind the skyline. The plaza was quiet again, just the sound of wind and pigeons, and peace. I sat down in the chair once more, not out of protest, not out of pain, but because this was my space now, our space, a space claimed not by conquest, but by truth. And as I looked across the plaza, I noticed something extraordinary. More chairs, dozens, scattered around, all different, all occupied, not by protesters, not by mourners, by people, reading, laughing, resting, living. And it hit me then, the lesson, the one I hadn't seen until this moment. They wanted me gone because I sat where I wasn't meant to be. But when I stayed, others realized they belonged there too. The act of sitting down had created a place to stand. Now when kids ask what I did in the war, I tell them less about the rifles and more about the chair. When young men ask how to change the world, I tell them not to underestimate quiet resistance. When journalists ask me what I want my legacy to be, I answer with a smile that I refused to move and in doing so moved a nation. So if you find yourself pushed aside, if someone tells you to kneel when you know you've done nothing wrong, if they call you unworthy of the space you occupy, remember this: sometimes the fight doesn't begin with fists. It begins with staying seated. And sometimes a chair is more than just a place to rest. Sometimes it's a revolution. In the end, this story wasn't just about a chair. It wasn't just about a veteran forced to kneel. It was about something far deeper. that dignity is not a luxury, it is a right. That one quiet act of defiance can ripple across a city and shake the walls of silence. That truth, when spoken with courage, can stand taller than any wall of power. We all carry chairs in our lives, moments where we must choose to sit, to stand, or to speak. So, when that moment comes for you, sit with honor, stand with purpose, speak without fear. Because the world doesn't change when the powerful rise. It changes when the forgotten refuse to fall. If this story moved, you don't let it end here. Subscribe for more real, raw, and powerful stories like this. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed injustice? What did you do? Share this video because someone somewhere is still being silenced. Let's make sure they're not alone. Together we stand, even if it begins with a chair.